All right, Shabbos, good morning. Let us begin. First of all, beautiful to start the Daf together, Meretz Hashem, in Chodesh Nisan. Also very special to begin with our sponsors. Baruch Hashem, for this month we have 4 Talmud Torah sponsors, which is incredibly beautiful and special to thank. Dr. Paul Zichron Levracha and Linda Weinberg for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month in commemoration of the 36th yahrzeit of their beloved son, Joshua, Martin Weinberg, Mordechai Yehoshua, Ben Peretz Moshe, Belea, Miriam. We thank Paul and Kathy Pollack, our Talmud Torah sponsors for Nisan, for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month in the zchus of refuah sheileimah for Kathy's sister, Donna Baker-Matson. We thank Steve and Teri Czinn for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month with gratitude to Hashem as they welcome their 3rd grandchild, Bunim Tzvi Hersch Mazel Tov. And our final Talmud Torah sponsor for Nisan, Naftali Tilson from Peretz Moshe, with thanks to his good friend Benjamin Wohl, and thanks to the entire shir, and wishing all a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Beautiful. And I will say what it's supposed to begin every day with such beautiful generosity and such beautiful kindness and sweetness, all of it supporting Talmud Torah here in our Kehillah. We thank all of our sponsors for their dedication and their generosity. I will say with that, let us begin. Today's daf is daf Chav Zayin, and we are picking up at Gufa, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines down from the top. Thank you to Abkama Kiba for giving the shir yesterday. Shabbos says now we're going to go back a little bit in Meretz Hashem and analyze one of the previously aforementioned cases. The Gemara says Gufa, Amar Shmuel, Chalatz la'achayos lo nifteru tsaros. If you go ahead and do chalitza with the sisters, you have not exempted the co-wives. So let's talk about this for just a little bit. Let's go back to the top Rashi on Amud Aleph. Top Rashi. So we're going to frame the case a little bit. It's not a complicated case, just requires a little bit of attentiveness. So it says Rashi, Shtei achayos shenaflu lefanav mishnei achim. So imagine the following scenario. You have 3 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven and Shimon themselves are both married to sisters. We'll call them Rachel and Leah. In addition to Rachel and Leah, Reuven and Shimon themselves each have an additional wife. We'll call her Sarah. Ultimately, again, Sarah is unrelated to any of the other wives, unrelated to anyone else in the picture. Okay, so once again, 3 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven and Shimon are married to 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah, and in addition to the 2 sisters, Reuven and Shimon each have an additional wife called Sarah. Okay, now what happens? In this case, Reuven and Shimon pass away. So now we'll say what ends up happening over here is Levi, the surviving brother, and obviously they pass away without children. Levi, the surviving brother, has now a pool of women who fall, or I should say a Yibum pool. Right now, within the Yibum pool, there are 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah. But also I want to point out, it's not the classic case of sisters. Well, actually, you can't have the classic case of sisters where, again, you're married to the same man. That would be asar, right? But again, these are sisters, both falling from different brothers, and again, and their co-wives. So I know. Let's look at Rashi. So that's what it is. Shtei achayos shenaf lefanav mishnei achim. So now there are 2 sisters who fell before Levi and Yibum, coming from 2 different brothers. V'chol achas tzara se'ima. And each sister has a tzara, a co-wife. So Rachel and Leah each have a co-wife. So we'll say, what's the halacha? What does Shmuel say? Lo niftiru tzarosehen hoil v'ibai liyabume lo matzi. So we'll say, you would think to say, if Levi were to do chalitza, let's say now remember again, there's 2 different acts of chalitza that have to occur over here, right? Because remember again, as much as this is all happening at the same time, in the case in question, we're assuming right now, for our purposes, Reuven and Shimon passed away at the same time. So this entire Yibum pool happens, but obviously, you have to do Yibum with the widows of each brother, or chalitza, with the widows of each brother. So what Shmuel is saying is like this. If you were to do chalitza, ultimately again with the sisters, with Rachel and Leah, that would not work for the co-wives. Now, what does it mean it wouldn't work for the co-wives? So let's play this out. So Levi, right? Levi's got a lot in his calendar, right? Because remember again, he's got to do Yibum / Chalitza for Reuven, Yibum / Chalitza for Shimon. 2 separate things. Now we're going to see Yibum is not really possible. Why isn't Yibum possible in this case? Because remember again, we've got what we've called Achoso zikukaso or Achos zikukaso. Remember again, assuming that we hold Yesh Zeka, right? Yesh Zeka means, a lot of pieces over here. Yesh Zeka means what? Yesh Zeka means what? That when there is a Yibum connection, we assume there's not just a Yibum connection, but there's a quasi-marital bond as well. Which means something very interesting now is happening with Levi. Right? Rachel and Leah, although they're falling from two different brothers, he can't do Yibum with Rachel. Why not? Because he's got a Zeka to Leah, who's Rachel's sister. Similarly, he can't do Yibum with Leah because he's got a Zika with Rachel, who's Leah's sister. So Yibum's off the table. Right? Yibum's off the table. The only option right now is Chalitza. So okay, so the sheileimah is now, who should he do Chalitza with? So Shmuel's coming along and saying, by the way, he really should not do Chalitza with the sisters. He shouldn't do Chalitza with Rachel and Leah. Rather, he should do the Chalitza with the co-wives. Now, obviously, once you do Chalitza with the co-wife, then what happens? Also, remember again, whenever you have a pair of wives that fall to you in Yibum or Chalitza, you don't have to do Chalitza with both. Chalitza with one takes care of the cohort. What Shmuel's highlighting is, do Chalitza with the co-wives, don't do Chalitza with what we call the primary wives, the sisters. Now again, why not? Rashi says, so he says, if you did, but what if you did, so I'm sorry, let's go back. So what if you did Chalitza with Shoshes? Now, so let's be clear. So we have Levi. Levi's got Reuven's wife Rachel and her co-wife, and he's got Levi's wife, and he's got Shimon's wife Leah and her co-wife. So now you can't do Yibum because of Achos Zikukas. So now we've established that. The only option on the table is going to be Chalitza. Let's say he did Chalitza with Rachel and Leah. What's the halacha? Did Chalitza with Rachel and Leah? So Rashi says, Lo nifteru tsarosehen. Now I both say, if he did Chalitza with Rachel and Leah, what has to happen next? He has to do another Chalitza with the co-wives. Again, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but Lamaisa, what Shmuel is saying is, the Chalitza ultimately, again, with the primary wives, with Rachel and Leah, does not exempt the co-wives. Only the Achas. Rashi says why. Sorry, but I'm just spending a little bit of time on this, just framing this case because it'll allow us to understand the rest of the sugya a little bit easier. So Rashi says, Lo nifteru tsarosehen. If you do Chalitza with Rachel and Leah, it does not go ahead and permit the co-wives. Why? Hoil v'iboy liabume lo matzi. Since Yibum with Rachel and Leah is impossible, Eliyachlot, right? So we'll say what Shmuel's highlighting over here is the following. See, a strong Chalitza only takes place in what kind of case? Where Yibum is possible. Right? Where Yibum is possible, but you choose Chalitza, that's a strong Chalitza. Where Yibum is not possible, that is called in Halacha a deficient Chalitza. Now, what makes a Chalitza deficient? The way the deficiency manifests itself is the Chalitza will only work for the woman with whom you performed it, but will not work for who? For the co-wife of that woman. So I will say, this is actually quite fascinating. So therefore, what the Gemara is saying is like this. Here's the issue, right? Let's just frame this again. I should have made a chart, right? Let's frame it again. We've got Levi. It's actually pretty straightforward. We've got Levi, right? Who's in front of Levi now for the Yibum pool? Who's there? Reuven's wife, who's Rachel and her co-wife. Shimon's wife, Leah and her co-wife. And they're all in front of Levi. So I will say, here's the issue. If Levi does Chalitza with Rachel and Leah, remember again, Yibum off the table, right? No Yibum in this case. Yibum is impossible because of Achos Zikukaso. Because he has a Zeka bond with each, and the other is the sister of the Zeka, okay? Now, if he does Chalitza with Rachel and Leah, Shmuel is saying is, that Chalitza will work for Rachel and Leah, but won't work for the co-wives. He'll have to go back and do another Chalitza for the co-wives. Why? Because we're supposed to listen to this. So what Shmuel is highlighting is, any Chalitza that doesn't carry with it the option of Yibum is a deficient Chalitza. How does the deficiency manifest itself? It only works for the woman with whom you're doing Chalitza, won't work for any of the co-wives. So if you were to do Chalitza with Rachel and Leah, what would Levi then have to do? What would he have to do? Another Chalitza with the co-wives. But watch this. Interestingly enough, what Shmuel is saying, however, is, if you were to do Chalitza with the co-wives, then what? That would work for Rachel and Leah. Now, why that works for Rachel and Leah, we're going to have to see in just a moment. But that is what Shmuel is espousing in this case. better to do chalitza with the co-wives, and that chalitza will take care of the sisters Rachel and Leah. But if you do chalitza with the sisters Rachel and Leah, they're fine, but you'll have to do another additional chalitza with the co-wives. Again, let's just finish that Rashi. Rashi says as follows, Ela yachlot letzaros, third line down in Rashi. Rather, what you do chalitza with the co-wives, v'yiftu rachayos. And if you do chalitza with the co-wives, that takes care of the sisters. Now one second, even though Yibum is not going to be permissible with the co-wives as well, Mihu kal isurim mishal achayos, hilchach af chalitzasa mishubachos mishal achayos. And also what we're going to see is, remember, Yibum is not possible in any of these scenarios, right? You can't do Yibum with the co-wives as well. What we're going to see is that the prohibition of the co-wives ultimately, again, is less than the prohibition of the sisters. Okay, we'll say that was a long introduction to the Gemara. Yes, let's go. So, Gufa Amar Shmuel, Chaletz la'achayos lo niftru tzaros. If halacha l'maisa, you went ahead and you did chalitza with the sisters, Rachel and Leah, again, lo niftru tzaros, which means the co-wives are not exempted. I will say, what does that mean? You have to chalitza again. I want to be clear. This is not saying there's not a remedy. Right? There's a remedy. You're just going to have to end up doing chalitza 4 times. Right? So if you go out and you start with chalitza for the sisters Rachel and Leah, that chalitza works for them, doesn't work for their co-wives. Conversely, l'tzaros nifteru achayos. But if you go out and you do chalitza, ultimately again, for the co-wives, that chalitza, interestingly enough, will work for the sisters Rachel and Leah as well. The Gemara adds in 2 more cases. Chalatz leba'alas haget, lo nifterat Sarah. I will say we're going to define this case in Amud Beis, but literally again, if you gave, let's say again, same case, a Yibum case, right, brother dies without children, the surviving brother gives one of the wives a get, and then does chalitza, that chalitza does not go ahead and exempt her co-wife. Again, we'll define that case in a little bit. The Gemara says, Litzara niftra ba'alas haget. But if you did chalitza for the co-wife, that'll take care of the wife who received the get. Again, I'm not explaining it here, we'll get to it later. Chalatz laba'alas hama'amar. Similarly, again, if you went ahead and you did chalitza with one of the women with whom you did ma'amar, but remember again, what's ma'amar? Ma'amar is like kiddushin for Yibum. In other words, I'll give you just a simple example. Reuven and Shimon, right? Reuven passes away, leaves behind 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. Shimon now goes ahead and is going to do Yibum. But before he does Yibum, he does Ma'amar. What does Ma'amar mean? He gives her kiddushin, right? He gives her a ring. Right? Right? So ultimately, that's unnecessary for Yibum, because all Yibum requires to solidify the marriage is relations, is biyah. So, but yet, ma'amar affects a quasi-bond. Again, we'll see what this means. Chalas labalas ma'amar, if you did chalitza to a woman after you did ma'amar, lo nifterat Sarah. Ultimately, again, her co-wife is not exempt. Let Sarah niftera ba'alas ma'amar. But if you did chalitza with the Sarah, with the co-wife, that exempts the wife with whom you did ma'amar. Again, I will say, we're going to define those cases. But here's what you have to take. Here's what Shmuel is espousing. Not all chalitzas are created equal. The highest form of chalitza, I will say, is what kind of case? Or I should say, not the highest form. The strongest chalitza occurs when? When you can do yibum. Right? So any scenario where yibum could occur and you do chalitza, that is the strongest form of chalitza. How does the strength of that chalitza manifest itself? It exempts everyone. A strong chalitza takes care of all of the women in question. Conversely, you could have a deficient chalitza. What's a deficient chalitza? It's a chalitza, ultimately, again, that doesn't carry with it the possibility of yibum. Now, that chalitza we'll call it a stunted chalitza. And again, how does that manifest itself? It only works for the woman with whom you are doing chalitza. Any other co-wives are going to need their other chalitza. Both say that is the sheet of Shmuel. That's it. All what you've seen is there's just 3 different cases in which it manifests itself, but this is the principle, which is really quite fascinating. So I will say, let's go back. Now we're going to analyze the first case. So I will say, let's go back to our original case. This is very exciting. You know what I'm saying? I always feel like I have to defend Yevamos, because I feel like Yevamos gets a very bad rap, right? Yevamos. People speak about it, sounds like the plague, right? Yevamos. Let's say, so again, you begin to see it just takes a little bit more time. That's all. It just takes a little bit more time, a little bit more explanation. But the truth is, we could actually tackle these sugyas. And I will say, by the way, I just want to point out, Arba Achin, this is actually considered to be one of the harder prakim in Maseches Yevamos. And it's really okay, right? It's going to be okay. So let's now listen to this. So let's go back to the first case. Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Reuven and Shimon married to two sisters. Reuven married to Rachel. Shimon married to Leah. Each Reuven and Shimon had another wife. We're going to call them Tzara. So we'll say, so if you are mapping this family tree, we've got Reuven, Rachel, Tzara, Shimon, Leah, Tzara. Levi, is the unencumbered single brother. Living the life, he's good, right? Not tied down, right? Doing whatever he wants. Good. So there's Levi. What happens? Reuven and Shimon pass away. Okay, now Levi now has this incredibly large yibum pool in front of him. So he's got Reuven with, again, Rachel Tzara. Now Reuven's gone. Rachel Tzara, Leah Tzara. Okay, so what did Shmuel say? Both say again, is yibum possible? Let's go through. Yibum possible? No. Yibum not possible. So again, chalitza is going to happen. So Shmuel just says, by the way, Levi, the best way to do this is do chalitza with each of the co-wives. Do chalitzas with the co-wives, because if you do that, you'll take care of Rachel and Leah as well. But if you do chalitza with Rachel, that doesn't take care of her co-wife. If you do chalitza with Leah, it's not going to take care of a co-wife, which is fine. You'll just have to do chalitza with each of the co-wives as well. Says the Gemara, why? Why is it that when Levi does chalitza with Rachel and Leah, it does not take care of their respective co-wives? Why? Dahavya lo achos isha bezeka. Okay, I'll say because why? Because remember again, assuming that Shmuel holds yesh zeka, the problem of course is if you do chalitza with the primary wives, we'll call it Rachel and Leah, halacha l'maisa, that is an impeded chalitza. That is what's the right word? A deficient. I don't want to use the word deficient because deficient sounds like it's something wrong with the chalitza. It's a less expansive chalitza, a less powerful chalitza. So watch this. Why? Because yibum is impossible, right? Why? Because remember again, Levi can't do yibum with Rachel. Why can't he do yibum with Rachel? Because ultimately he has a zeka to Rachel's sister. He can't do yibum with Leah because he's got a zeka to Leah's sister. So because yibum is impossible, therefore again the chalitza in and of itself is not as powerful. It's not a lechatchila dika. It's not a dika chalitza, and therefore again, if he does it with these women, it works for them, but doesn't work for the co-wives. I don't understand. Chaltz l'tzaros nami lo lifteru achayos dahavi luhu tzaros achos isha bezeka. I don't understand. But shouldn't you have the same problem if you do chalitza with the co-wives? So we'll say, what are the co-wives? The co-wives are the tzara, right? The co-wives are tzaros achos isha bezeka. Ultimately, again, it's the co-wife of one's. It's the co-wife. Ultimately, again, of the sister of whom one has a zeka to. So I will say, we always see what the Gemara is essentially saying is, don't we always treat co-wives the same way as what? As other wives. In other words, we look at the wives kind of as a unit. So I will say, this goes back to the original Mishnah. What do we learn in the first Mishnah of Yevamos? If one of the women is an erva, then who does that erva status spread to? Everyone. So if you're telling me, I don't understand. Telling me, Levi, don't do chalitza with Rachel and with Leah, because that's called achos ishto bezeka. That's considered to be, that's the sister of a woman to whom you have a zeka. Okay, so how does doing chalitza with the tzaros help either? This is the tzara of a woman who has a sister to whom you have a zeka. It's equally as problematic. To which the Gemara says, no. Kasav Shmuel ein zeka. Oh, no, you got this wrong. Shmuel holds ein zeka. Shmuel doesn't hold zeka. What? So V'hamar Shmuel yesh zeka. Only one little problem, by the way. Shmuel explicitly said there is zeka. There is zeka. So how can you say ultimately again that he holds ein zeka? L'divrei ha'omer ein zeka ka'omer. Shmuel is saying according to the opinion who holds ein zeka, right? It's better to go ahead and do chalitza with the co-wives than it is to do with the primary wives. The Gemara says, I don't understand. Ihachi chalatz la'achayos amaylo niftiru tzaros. Again, fine. If Shmuel himself holds yesh zeka, If Shmuel is saying, I'm talking to the opinion who holds Ein Zeka, Rabbi will say, if Ein Zeka, then who should you do chalitza with? Who should you do chalitza with? The sisters, with Rachel and Leah. Because also, remember again, the only reason we said not to do chalitza with Rachel and Leah was why? Because if you have a zika, the problem with doing, let's say again, the problem with doing yibum, let's say with Rachel, forget about chalitza, you could even do what? You could do yibum. But again, even if you do chalitza, so it'd be even better, do chalitza with Rachel and Leah. If there's no zika, then there's absolutely no problem. To which the Gemara says, Bishlam atzara de Rachel, lo tiftar. So I'll say, okay, so now I have to backpedal a little bit because the truth is, I didn't set up the case as well. The way that the Gemara is understanding, Rachel in this case refers to the second. Yeah, it's okay. You know what? It's fine. People are going to make it work. We're going to make it work. This is why I have to start using a chart. We're going to make it work. So I'll say, now watch this. The Gemara says, I understand when it comes to the second group with whom Levi is going to do chalitza with. Let's go out of order for just a moment, right? Because we said, Ruvain, Rachel, Sarah, Shimon, Leah, Sarah. No problem. Let's assume for a moment that Levi is doing chalitza with Leah first. Okay, so he does chalitza with Leah first. He does chalitza with Leah. I understand ultimately again, Bishlam Sarah de Rachel lo tiftar. I understand that the co-wife of Rachel ultimately again will not be exempted with her chalitza. This is now the second woman with whom he's doing chalitza. The cheban de chalatz la Leah. V'hadra chalatz l'Rachel, havyu l'chalitza de Rachel chalitza psula. Because I will say, once Levi goes ahead and does chalitza with Leah, and then he does chalitza with Rachel, ultimately again, havyu l'chalitza de Rachel chalitza psula. Ultimately again, the chalitza of Rachel will be what's called the chalitza psula. Now I will say, what does chalitza psula mean? Now again, it doesn't mean a bad chalitza. What does it mean? What does it mean? We'll call it a less powerful chalitza. Because let's remember again, once you do chalitza, play this out. Once Levi does chalitza with Leah, right? You will say, could he do yibum with Rachel? Let's play this out. Could he do yibum with Rachel? No. Why not? That's called achos chalutzaso. You are not allowed to marry, or to do yibum for that matter, with the sister of the woman with whom you did chalitza. So therefore the Gemara says, I understand, Lamaisa, if Levi starts with Shimon's widow, and he does chalitza with Leah, and then ultimately by the time he gets to Rachel, I understand why ideally we wouldn't want him to do the chalitza with Rachel, because that is a deficient chalitza, because Yibum is impossible. How is the Gemara says, chalitza psula ella, Sarah de Leah, tipater, but ultimately again, the Sarah of Leah, ultimately again, should have no problem being Petura, being exempted with Leah's chalitza. To which the Gemara says, Milo nifteru tsaros. Milo nifteru. What does it mean when it says ultimately again? Milo nifteru tsaros. What does it mean when it says that tsaros are not exempted? So the Gemara says, Atzara de Rachel. You're right, it's referring to the tzara of Rachel. According to this approach, if you hold Ein Zeka, Shmuel speaking to the opinion holds Ein Zeka, then Ein Achinami, Levi, the surviving brother, could go ahead and do chalitza with Leah, and I will say, once he does chalitza with Leah, who else does that chalitza take care of? It takes care of Leah's co-wife, right? Now he has to do chalitza with Shimon's widow. The problem is, if he does chalitza with Reuven's widow, with Rachel, the problem is now when he does chalitza with Rachel, that is a deficient chalitza. Why is it a deficient chalitza? Because halacha l'maisa, Rachel is now what? The sister of the woman with whom Levi did chalitza. Okay, so I understand that's when we say don't do chalitza with Rachel, instead do chalitza with the co-wife. And if you do chalitza with Rachel's co-wife, then what? That'll take care of Rachel as well. Maybe that's what the Bryce is saying. To which the Gemara says, "V'hat saros kama." Here's the problem: it says saros in the plural. It's not just talking about one co-wife; it's talking about multiple co-wives. So the Gemara says, maybe saros the alma. So about saros in general. Ihachi choletz litzaros niftura chayos. That's the case when it says that if you go and do chalitza with the co-wives, you take care of the sisters. V'atzaras Rachel mi miftara. Ultimately, again, but a tzar of Rachel would she really be part of it? Now we learned asr li asr adam bitzaras krovas chalutzaso. Ultimately, again, a person is prohibited to the co-wife of someone who is related to someone with whom he did chalitza, which is very interesting. I don't say so. In other words, you're not allowed to marry a woman who is related to someone with whom you did chalitza, immediate relation. To which the Gemara says, Shmuel nami hischil v'lo hischil kamar. Shmuel really means as follows. So I'm going through this a little bit quicker because we're going to see, we're going to dismiss this entire Havamina in just a moment. So Shmuel, the truth is, it's talking about a case of hischil. Shmuel's talking about who you started chalitza with. Here we go. Hischil ba'achayos lo yigmar betzaros. If you began to do chalitza with one of the sisters, you can't finish with tzaros. Why not? Disnan asr adam b'tzaras krovas chalutzaso. Ultimately, again, because a person is prohibited to marry the co-wife of someone who is related to someone with whom he did chalitza. Hischil b'tzaros yigmor af ba'achayos. But if ultimately, again, you begin with the tzaros, you can finish even with the sisters. This just talking about the order of chalitza. Disnan muter adam bikrovas tzaras chalusaso. Because ultimately, again, we said that a person is permitted, ultimately, again, to someone who is related to the tzara of his chalutza. Okay, so I will say, so in this entire approach, so just understand what we've just done. We're trying to figure out why in this case of the three brothers, Reuven married to Rachel, co-wife, Shimon married to Leah, co-wife, Levi, single. Reuven and Shimon die, this entire pool of women come now before Levi. Shmuel made a statement. Shmuel said, Levi, do chalitza with the co-wives, and if you do that, you exempt Rachel and Leah. But if you go out and you do chalitza with Rachel and Leah, you exempt them, but you're going to have to go out and do a subsequent chalitza with the co-wives. Why? So the Gemara originally wanted to say, ultimately, again, that this is reflective of Shmuel's opinion, Yesh Zeka. The Gemara then says, no, Shmuel's talking to the opinion that says, Ein Zeka, and the Gemara develops this entire construct to support that idea. Comes along Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi Amar, the Olam Kidika Amrit. No, Rav Ashi, sorry, scratch that. Right? This is Shmuel's Shita, and this is reflective of Shmuel's own Shita of Yesh Zeka. The Rabbi say, here's the problem. Now remember again, if you hold Yesh Zeka, right, what's the problem? If you hold Yesh Zeka should create a problem by the chalitza, even of who? Of the co-wives. Others Rabbi say, if you hold Yesh Zeka, that means that Levi has effectively a marital bond to every single one of these women. So Lamaisa, again, shouldn't you run into the same problem with everyone of Achos Zikukaso, or Tsaras Achas Zikukaso? To which the Gemara says, watch this. Very simple answer. Mishum dolo alima zeka l'shavuye l'tzara ke'erva. Wow. They both say, essentially the Gemara says is like this. Zeka is only so powerful. So what will happen in this case is as follows. See, in this case, Zeka will prevent Levi from doing Yibum. Right? Levi can't do Yibum. Why can't Levi do Yibum? Why? Because he has a Zika to two sisters. Right? Two sisters. So Yibum is off the table. So but Yibum, says Rav Ashi, is not so powerful to go ahead and confer upon the co-wives a status of tsaras erva. Right? So here's what's happening over here. So the Zika is powerful enough to say, Levi, you kind of have a marital bond to two sisters, so Yibum is off the table, because doing Yibum with any one of those would kind of be a violation of marrying your wife and her sister. Right? But Zika is not powerful enough to say that the co-wives in Rachel of Leah take on a quasi-erva status as well. Zika is not that powerful. Look what it says. Mishum delo alima zeka. Zeka is not powerful enough. L'shavuye l'tzara ke'erva. It does not make the co-wives of Rachel and Leah like sisters as well. It doesn't confer. So we'll say incredible, right? So this essentially Shmuel's whole premise is based on the fact that there's only a problematic zeka to two women. So therefore, again, Yibum's off the table, and because there's a problematic zika, you can't marry them, therefore their chalitza is a diminished chalitza. So therefore, so much better to do chalitza with the co-wives, because for them, the zika doesn't confer upon them any erba status to the co-wives. Therefore, do chalitza with the co-wives, that's a powerful chalitza, and the chalitza of the co-wives exempts ultimately the primary wives, Rachel and Leah. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Tanya Kavasi Diravashi. We'll say the universe is in perfect alignment in this moment. So Tanya Kavas Diravashi. If you do chalitza with the sisters Rachel and Leah, that does not exempt the co-wives. Chalitzaros nifteru achayos. But if you do chalitza with the co-wives, it exempts the sisters. My time, what's the reason? La mishum de kasava yesh zega. It must be Shmuel holds yesh zega. So also remember again, that's the necessary first step. Because it's yesh zega that says that what? You have a marital bond to two sisters, right? Therefore again, no yibum, and chalitza that you would do it, that would be deficient. Because Rabbi say, remember again, what's the definition of a deficient chalitza? Any situation where you can't do yibum. Okay, we have to keep all these pieces in mind. So therefore again, yesh zeka, because yesh zeka, no yibum, because no yibum to Rachel and Leah, therefore deficient chalitza, because deficient chalitza, the chalitza will only work for those women for whom you're doing the chalitza, not the co-wives. So therefore better to do chalitza on the co-wives. Why? So ultimately, get my time, la mishum nekasaver, yesh zeka, wow, there is Zeka. Zeka creates a marital bond between Rachel and Leah. So Levi, ultimately Yibum is impossible. Therefore Chalitza is deficient, but Zeka is not powerful enough to confer any erva status to the co-wives of Rachel and Leah. Therefore again, Halacha L'Maisa, their Chalitza is a complete Chalitza. Therefore better to do Chalitza with the co-wives and exempt the sisters through that Chalitza as well. Incredible. Rabbi Amar Mamo. Hamani, we'll say whose opinion does this reflect? Beishamai. This is Beishamai. This now Beishamai Tirin Atzaros La'achin. Ultimately, and I will say, Halacha L'Maisa. Remember we saw this actually. It was very surprising because from the first Mishnah we thought it was like L'divrei Hakol that the co-wife of an erva ultimately again is asura. It comes along Beishamai says the co-wife of an erva is mutter. An erva does not take on the status. I will say this seems to reflect, what we're learning right now, seems to reflect the opinion of Beishamai. Because what we're saying over here is that the koif of Rachel, the koif of Leah, do not take on any of their erva status. To which the Gemara says, Ihachi yabume nami tisyabim. Oh, so if that's the case, why not do yibum? If this is all true, that the erva status of Rachel and Leah, of Achos Zikuchaso, does not go ahead and spread down to the co-wives, if that's really true, and Lamaisa, this is reflective of the view of Beis Shammai, who says that co-wives in general do not take on the erva status of the primary wives, let Levi do yibum. Why is this only a discussion about Chalitza? Let Levi do yibum. Oh, that's someone else. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. What did Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? We saw this before. What did Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri say? Bo unetakel lemitzaros shucholtzos v'lomis yavmos. Yochanan ben Nuri said, in every case where there is a prohibited wife and then you have a co-wife, we should always just legislate chalitza. Why? Because what does chalitza do? Chalitza makes everyone happy. Chalitza makes Beis Hillel happy because Beis Hillel says it's aser anyway, right? Beis Hillel's opinion is reflected in the first Mishnah of the Masechta, which is that halacha l'maisa, the co-wife of an erva has an erva status. So therefore, according to Beis Hillel, you can't marry her anyway because she's an erva. According to Beis Shammai, he says that tzara of an erva is permitted. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, just do chalitza. Just do chalitza. That makes everyone happy. Everyone is fine. To which the Gemara says, but we learned that ultimately, again, they tried to pass in the halacha like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, but somehow, again, time got away from them, and they never came to that conclusion. After Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, they in fact legislated this way to always do chalitza. And I will say now, for us, this last piece is a bit academic because halacha l'maisa, we pass like Beis Hillel, that the co-wife of an erva has the status of the erva herself, and therefore is totally removed from the discussion of yibum and chalitza. But I will say, what I will point out is as follows. The Rambam does paskin like Rav Ashi's interpretation of Shmuel. So we'll say, the principle, let's talk about the case and the principle. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, in this kind of case that we've described, three brothers, Ruvain married to Rachel with a co-wife, Shimon married to Leah with a co-wife, Levi single. Reuven, by the way, Levi doesn't have to be single. Levi could also be married just to unrelated women, but for our purposes, single. Reuven and Shimon pass away. All of these women fall before Levi. The way we paskin halacha l'maisa is yesh zeka. There is a zeka bond, right, between the yavam and the women. Therefore, again, yibum is impossible in this kind of case. and we paskin ideally do chalitza with the co-wives, ultimately again, and not with Rachel and Leah. Why? Because if you do with the co-wives, that takes care of everyone. If you go ahead and you do Yibum with Rachel and Leah, chalitza with Rachel and Leah, it works for Rachel and Leah, but you have to what? Go back and do chalitza with the other wives. Why, Rabbi say? Because halacha l'maisa, we accept this principle that a bona fide chalitza is only in a case where Yibum is possible. But when Yibum is not possible, you have what we call diminished chalitza. Diminished chalitza is absolutely unequivocally kosher. But it only works for whom? For whom? For the person with whom you are doing chalitza, will not work for any of the co-wives. That's what diminished chalitza means. And I will say, that's how the Rambam passes in Hilchos Yibum Mechalitza, Perek Hey, Halacha Yud Beis, where the Rambam writes, he says, She'ein chalitza, I'm just meaning in the middle, it's talking about a case, She'ein chalitza pechusa, misalekes zikas yibum mibayis zeh. The Rambam uses lashon of chalitza pechusa, a diminished chalitza. And the definition of diminished chalitza is any chalitza where yibum cannot be affected, that is called a diminished chalitza. So we'll say, incredible, it's very, very important. This is a very important sugya, because we've just been introduced to a number of things. Number one, yesh zega, which we've already seen, that's pretty much how we paskin. Yesh zega, although that machlokes is going to keep coming up over and over and over again. So there is a quasi-marital bond between the yavam and the widows. And number two, ultimately, again, there is a concept of a diminished chalitza. Chalitza pechusa. Any chalitza where yibum cannot occur is a diminished chalitza. The diminution of the chalitza manifests itself in its inability to affect chalitza for any of the co-wives. It only affects chalitza. So therefore, all Shmuel, so we'll say, Shmuel's teaching a very simple principle, which is what? Whenever you have multiple women who fall before you in yibum, this is good to know. Whenever you have multiple women who fall before you in yibum, right? So ultimately, best to do chalitza with who? With who? With the woman who could have a complete chalitza. And that's the benefits for everyone. Because then one chalitza could take care of all of the women in that cohort. Again, obviously I will say, if you're talking about multiple brothers, chalitza for one brother's wife is not going to work for the other brothers. But if one brother was married to multiple women, so proper chalitza could exempt all of the women in that marital cohort. Versus when you do diminished chalitza pechusa, that'll work for the woman with whom you are doing chalitza with, but will not work for the other women in the marital cohort. Incredible. Ibaylo. Good. Ibaylo says goodbye. So now we're going to go back to the other cases of Shmuel. Ibaylo. Ba'alas haget or ba'alas hamamar. So both said, now listen to these cases. Look at Rashi. These are great cases also. Chavzayin Amud Beis. Ba'alas haget or ba'alas hamamar. Both say this is really beautiful. Rashi says, Echav shemes. Say beautiful. You know, I'm reminded of a story that when I was first married, I was learning a kollel at YU, and good old days. We had one car. Right? Now people get married, they have two cars in the beginning. One car. Remember, it was like a tiny little Toyota Tercel. I don't even think they make that car anymore. I think it was declared like dangerous, so they stopped making it. It felt like a Flintstones car. It had tires like bicycle tires. But it was cheap. It was very cheap, right? So we had a Toyota Tercel. So my wife used to pick me up from yeshiva on Sunday, whatever, Sunday evening, 6 o'clock, whatever it was. So she asked me what I was learning. So I remember at that point in time we were learning, remember, we learned Maseches Nida, we were learning the parak of Hamapelas. Hamapelas, Yisakis, is if a woman miscarries and if Mapelas come in, sandal, all these things. So I remember, I'm getting into this sugya. I'm so excited. It's such a great sugya, Mapelas. If she miscarries and it looks like a sandal and it looks like this, and I'm going, mamish, I'm so excited. I'm married. We're talking Torah. This is fantastic. It's beautiful, right? And I see my wife's turned pale. She's like, I don't understand. This woman just miscarried. So how could it be that everybody is just so focused ultimately on what it looks like? How is it that you're so excited about something that is so tragic? So it was an incredible musar. So first of all, I will tell you that it gave me a brand new understanding, by the way, into what Noshim Daitos Kalos mean. Noshim Daitos Kalos is not Chazal disparaging women. You're not allowed to disparage anyone. let alone the most important people in Klal Yisrael. Let me be very clear about this. Right? It's now Chodesh Nisan. Chazal tell us that Klal Yisrael were only redeemed b'zchus nashim tzidkanios. It wasn't the men, it wasn't us, Rabbi Say. It wasn't us. We gave up. It was the women who caused the geula. So to think, I always get very upset by this, to think that Chazal are disparaging women by saying nashim daitos kalosein. But I realized something amazing in that moment. It actually helped me a lot in marriage, which is that men have the ability to look at something through a fully intellectual prism, devoid of any emotion. So I could talk about a case of miscarriage, and it doesn't even dawn on me. To think about the human component of that. There's a human component in that. Someone suffered a loss, and it could be a tragic loss. But I could sit down to a piece of Gemara, and I could get into it, and this, that, and it never even dawns on me that maybe there's a human being, that there's an element of human suffering on here. I'll say ultimately again. So when das is intellect, so datos kalos just means that the power and the beauty of women is ultimately again that emotion is infused in everything. And by the way, that's not a lacking. That's something beautiful. Because the truth is, the ability to operate with just intellect without emotion is a deficiency that we have. It's not a strength. The ability to always have emotion in everything you do. So I'm just reminded of this now because I'm saying this is such a beautiful case. It's so incredible, so fantastic. People have died, right? So again, Reuven, Shimon, they died, left behind widows. So sometimes it's important, like we get a little bit carried away with we have to always be careful in life to never let the intellect carry us away to the exclusion of emotion. Obviously, you can't let emotion carry you away either, because that could get you into a lot of trouble as well. The goal in life, of course, is to settle on some level of synthesis. In any event, I think it's still a beautiful case, right? But Lamaisa, take a look. So balas again, balas mamar. Look at Rashi. Rashi says balas again, balas mamar. Rashi says achiv shemes v'lo beis nashim v'asa ze ma'amar lezu v'get lezu. So we'll say here's the case. Simple case, right? Reuven passes away, and ultimately Reuven left behind two wives. Again, simple case. Rachel and Leah, not related, easy. So achav shemes v'lo beis nashim v'asa ze ma'amar lezu v'get lezu. So we'll say, now watch this. So Reuven passes away, leaves behind two wives. Shimon goes ahead and does ma'amar with Rachel. Hariat mikudeshes li betavaz with Rachel. And ultimately, again, gives a get to Leah. Don't ask why. This is what he did. He gave a get to Leah. So I'll say, so now what happens? Once he gives a get to Leah, what happens? You'll say, now, does a get affect Chalitza? No. But what does a get do? It closes the door on Yibum. In other words, we'll see this. Once you give a get, Yibum is off the table. Now you still have to do Chalitza, but Yibum is a pastor. So we'll say, so in this case, it's very interesting. He did ma'amar with Rachel, gave a get to Leah. So now Yibum is off the table. So the kimlei below Yivna. Kevin she's chalagarish ezomehen haguna lachlos v'liftat tzara. So we'll say, now watch this. Balas agila balas amamar ezomehen kodemes. So we'll say, such a fascinating sheileimah. So now let's say again, Shimon, the surviving brother, he did ma'amar with Rachel, and he gave a get to Leah. So now he has to do chalitza. So we'll say, what's the shayla? Whom should he do chalitza with? Which wife is it better to do chalitza with? So the Gemara says, Eizem hen kodemes. Balas haget adifa, mishum da'aschil ba b'chalitza. Ultimately, again, is it better for him to do chalitza with the wife with whom he gave the get? Right, Leah? Why after all? We'll say, why is that better? Ultimately, again, because you could kind of that giving a get is kind of the beginning of chalitza. So he's begun the chalitza process with this woman. Therefore, Allah Chalamaysa, finish it off. O Dilma, Balas Mamar Adiva, Mishum de Krovalabio. Or maybe not. See, Rabbi said, this is fascinating. You see, what did we just learn? What's the best kind of chalitza? The best kind of chalitza. Where you have the option for Yibum. Oh, well, if that's the case, maybe you should do chalitza with Rachel. Why? Because he made this whole beautiful proposal to Rachel, right? He gave her a ring. The Gemara calls it what's called krova labia. Ultimately, again, maybe there's a stronger, marital bond with her. So as I say, you hear the shaila? Should he do chalitza with the woman with whom he already began the process of dissolution of the marital bond by giving her a get or yibam bond? Or should he do chalitza with the woman with whom he did ma'amar because there's a closer connection? Maybe that's a more powerful chalitza. Incredible. Amar Rashi, Tashma, Umod Rabbi Gamliel, sheyesh get achar ma'amar, uma'amar achar get. So let's say another interesting case. Rabbi Gamliel says that halacha l'maisa, there is such a thing as a get after ma'amar and ma'amar after a get. What does that mean? Look at Rashi. Umod Rabbi Gamliel, Damar l'kamam parakei, aim get achar get moda. Sheyesh get achar ma'amar. What's the case of get after ma'amar? Here we go. Keep going. Beis Yevamos me'ach echad va'asa ma'amar bazu v'achar nasan get lazu mahani get lifsal harishon alav mishum lo yivna uleha'asa b'krovos shniya keberishona. So I'll say this case we just said before. If halach l'mais Reuben passes, they leave behind Rachel and Leah, and Shimon goes ahead and what? Shimon does ma'amar with Rachel and gives a get to Leah. So I'll say, once you give a get, that's what it means, that there's get achar ma'amar. That once you give a get, even though you did ma'amar, that prevents yibum from occurring. And there's also ma'amar achar get. But so what is ma'amar achar get? Look at Rashi. Im nasan get l'rishon. What if you switched it? What if Shimon gave a get to Rachel and then did ma'amar with Leah? So we'll say, so what do we say? We don't say that the first get lo amrinon get kama b'makom chalitza kai b'sulo kani ma'amar yam mitzara elabad mahani yitzricha get. And what we're going to see, by the way, when you do ma'amar, not only do you have to go and do chalitza, but you also have to give a get. So we'll say, so let's say halacha l'maisa, Reuven gave a get to Rachel and then did ma'amar with Leah. He's still going to have to go ahead. We don't say that the ma'amar with Leah is inconsequential. Rather, he has to give a get. We'll say the point over here is what? What do you see? The Gemara says, "I get adif lo lahani ma'amar basrei." If get is stronger, then ma'amar after it shouldn't work. The ma'amar adif, and if ma'amar is better, lo lahani get basrei. Get shouldn't work after it. Ella lav shmamino kiadadininu. Rather, we'll say ultimately, again, you see, rather in halacha, these two women are equal. Therefore, again, we'll say going back to what was our original question. Reuven passes away, leaves behind Rachel and Leah. Right, what did Shimon do? Shimon goes ahead and gives a get. Right, or I should say, does ma'amar with Rachel and gives a get to Leah. Whom, now again, what do we know? What can't he do anymore? Right, Yibum. Yibum was off the table. Right, since he went ahead and gave a get, Yibum was off the table. So he's going to have to do chalitza. What's the sheileimah? Whom should he do chalitza with? Whom should he do chalitza with? So we'll say, so again, and what's essentially the answer? Either one. Either one. They both have the same status, and therefore, halacha l'mais, again, you could do chalitza with either one you choose. Incredible, Shamina. But let's say, Vaitu. Amar Rafuna. Amar Rav. Beis achayos Yevamos. So we'll say, here we go. So ultimately, again, two sisters. Shenaflu lifnei yavam echad. So we'll say, here we go. Now, ultimately, again, here's the case. You have two sisters who are married to two different people. Okay, so we'll say this is going to be, look at Rashi. Actually, not yet. So, right, Beis achayos Yevamos, shenaflu lifnei yavam echad. So we'll say classic case, right? Two sisters married to two brothers, right? So Reuven and Shimon married to Rachel and Leah, two sisters. Reuven and Shimon pass away, and now ultimately, again, two sisters come before Levi for Yibum. So, right, Beis achayos Yevamos, shenaflu lifnei yavam echad. Chalatz l'rishona hutra. If he does chalitza for Rachel, that's just right. Once he does chalitza for the first one, hutra. Rashi says hutra l'shuk. They both say all the Gemara is saying over here is when he does chalitza for Rachel, Rachel's done. She's not permitted to marry anyone who she wants. Obviously, with caveat, she's a chalutza, right? So at least midrabanan she can't marry a kohen. But lamaisa she can get remarried, right? Chalatz l'shniya hutra. If he goes ahead and he does chalitza for the second one, she's also permitted. Okay, I will say that line doesn't seem to be adding anything. All it's saying is that what? Once you do chalitza, ultimately again, the women are permitted to get remarried. Beautiful. Here we go. Watch this. Meisa rishona, mutar b'shniya. Ooh. I will say, what about the following case? What about halacha l'maisa? Halacha l'maisa in the following situation. Imagine for a moment, right? Reuven and Shimon pass away. Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters, Rachel and Leah. Reuven and Shimon pass away. Ultimately, again, what happens? Now the two wives, Rachel and Leah, two sisters, fall before Levi. So let's presuppose that we're holding Yesh Zeka. Because of Yesh Zeka, therefore, what's impossible? What's impossible? Hibum. Let's assume that for a moment. Okay? So therefore, does the Gemara say, listen, just do chalitza. So do chalitza with Rachel, she can go on with her life. Do chalitza with Leah, she'll go on with her life, and Shalom al Yisrael. Watch this. what happens if before Levi did anything, so he's got these two widows in front of him, Rachel and Leah. What happens if before he did anything, Mesa Rishona, Rachel passed away? So what happens if Rachel passed away? Say, Mutter B'Shnia. Now Levi can what? Can do Yibum with who? With Leah. Right? Why could he do Yibum with Leah? Because ultimately, again, there's no Zeka Asura, right? There's no marital banners, there's no sister issue anymore, because ultimately one of the sisters passed away. Look at Rashi, Mesa Rishona, below Chalitza, Mutter Liyabe Mesashnia, V'afapi Shebishas Nefilason Achos Zikukas Rishona Haisa, Ve'ena Nikori Ba Yevama Yava Aleha, Ki Mesa Kamaisa Paka Zeka V'shar Yahach. Ultimately, this is incredible. Essentially, once Rachel passes away, so ultimately Levi is permitted to do Yibum now with Leah. Similarly, Ve'in Tzarech Lomar Mesa Shnia Shemutar Rishona. And it goes without saying that if the second sister died, certainly the first one is mutter. Now, the way this case is working is like this: Reuven and Shimon didn't die at the same time. Right? So what happened over here is that Reuven died, right? Left behind a widow, Rachel, no children. Sometime afterwards, but before Levi did anything, before any of the brothers did anything with Rachel, then Shimon died. So now, so why is this important? Because what's interesting about this case is, there was a point in time where Levi could have done Yibum with Rachel. Right? When could he have done Yibum with Rachel? When? Before Shimon died. Because remember again, when it was just Rachel, ultimately again he's permitted to go ahead and marry Rachel. That's not a problem. So now once Shimon died, and now he has Rachel and Leah in front of him. So what's what the Gemara is saying is like this: the first opinion says, Meisa Rishona Mutar B'Shnia. If Rachel dies, he's permitted to marry Leah, and it goes without saying that what? That if Leah dies, second wife, right, second Yevama, if she dies, certainly you can marry Rachel. Why? Listen to this. Mishum dahavya Yevama shehutra v'ne'esra v'chazra v'hutra tachzer lehetera harishon. Why, Rabbi? Because listen to this. How do we look at Rachel? Rabbi, watch this. Rachel was permitted, right? When was she permitted? When her husband first died. Then she became prohibited. When did she become prohibited? When Shimon died, and now her sister became a Yevama as well. And then she becomes permitted again. When did she become permitted again? When Leah dies again, right? When Leah dies. So this is a case of Hutra, Asra, Chazra v'Hutra, that ultimately, again, of course, is permitted. So we'll say, so this is the opinion of the Tanakh, opinion of the Rabbanan, that Allah Chalamaysa. We'll say, this is, by the way, this is a much more straightforward case of our previous case, right? We have no co-wives over here. We've just got three brothers, Reuven and Shimon, and Levi. Reuven and Shimon are married to brothers. Right? This is not a 2022 case, right? Right? So ultimately, Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. So halacha l'maisa again. Now Reuven dies, then Shimon dies. Levi's got these two women in front of him. So in a normal situation, normal over here is he does chalitza with Rachel, chalitza with Leah, because Yibum is impossible. Now here's the wrinkle. What happens if Rachel passes away? Tanakama says you could do Yibum ultimately with Leah, and if Leah passes away, of course you could also do Yibum with Rachel. Second case is even stronger, because at least Rachel in the beginning had a period of time where she was totally muteres in Yibum. Says the Gemara, but say an argument. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Mesa shnia mutar b'rishona. If Leah, the second Yevama, if she dies, then Rachel is permitted. Right? Aval Mesa Rishona Asura B'Shnia. But Rabbi say Halacha L'Maisa, Leah, the second wife, is always going to be Asura in Yibum. Even if Rachel passes away. My time, what's the reason? Shekol Yevama She'ina Nikori Ba B'Shas Nefila Yevama Yava Aleha Harezu Ke'eshes Ach Sheyesh Labanim Ba'Asura. Wow. Rabbi say this is incredible. Essentially what we're saying is like this. What Rabbi Yochanan comes along and says is, let's talk about the principle and then we'll plug it into the case. Rabbi Yochanan says, Yibum identity is concretized at the time of death. Rabbi says, we've already seen this concept before. Your Yibum identity and what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, is concretized and solidified at the moment you become eligible for Yibum. So if Rabbi Yochanan will say like this, Halacha l'maisa, the moment that Leah, right, when does Leah become eligible for Yibum? Yibum Chalitz, when does she become eligible? When her husband Shimon dies. right? At that moment when Shimon dies, and suddenly Leah is thrust into the Yibum Chalitza pool, what's her eligibility? What's her eligibility for Yibum? 0. Why? Because her sister Rachel, the widow of Ruvain, is in the same Yibum pool with the same brother as well. Rabbi Yochanan says, if you enter into the parsha of Yibum ineligible, that ineligibility remains with you. It doesn't change. So that even if Rachel were to die, so now Leah is the only wife waiting for Yibum, she still can't do Yibum, she has to do Chalitza. This is different than Rachel. Because remember again, when Rachel, the widow of Reuven, when she comes into the Yibum pool, what's her eligibility? Eligible. Right? Because remember, why not? She's the only wife in the Yibum pool. Now again, subsequently, Shimon passes away, her sister Leah now comes into the Yibum pool, so at that point in time, Allah Chalamaysa, she's ineligible for Yibum. But if then Leah dies, Rachel once again becomes eligible. So we'll say a fundamental machlokes. The Rav, Leslie High Svara. Ultimately, again, there's Rav. Rav was the first opinion. Does Rav not hold to this? Because we'll say Rav said that halacha l'maisa. Rav said that even once Rachel dies, ultimately Leah is not eligible for Yibum. So does Rav not hold the svara of Rabbi Yochanan? To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan essentially is like this. If you are not, if you are not eligible for Yibum at the moment that you come into the Yibum pool, you're never eligible. You are permanently disqualified from Yibum. Does Rav not hold of this? Rav, Kol isha shani koriba b'shas nefila yavama yava aleha harehi ke'eshes ach sheyesh labanim va'asura. Yet Rav himself said that any woman who is not eligible for Yibum at the moment that she falls into the Yibum pool, she is treated like literally again a brother's wife with children, which means she remains forever asura. To which the Gemara says, no. The Gemara says, Hani mili. Oh, it's true. When Rav says, when do we say that when there's eligibility at the beginning, that becomes sustained ineligibility? Right? Let me say it differently. When do we say that halacha l'maisa, if a woman can't do Yibum, she is permanently precluded from doing Yibum? That's when there is a biblical disqualification. Also, I give you a good example of this. Let's say Levi's married to a third sister. Right? There's Rachel, there's Leah, and there's Bilhah. Right? So Reuven is married to Rachel, Shimon is married to Leah, and Levi is married to Bilhah. So now what happens, Rabbi was saying? So now let's say Reuven passes away. So halacha l'maisa, is Reuven allowed to do Yibum with Rachel? No. Achos ishto. Excellent. Absolutely not. Right? He's his wife's sister. So we'll say, so Rav will say, that's the case where I would see, now imagine the following scenario. Imagine that a little while later, before anything happened, so ultimately, again, Levi's wife, Bilhah, passes away. She passes away. Right? So now ultimately, again, Levi's no longer married to Rachel's sister. Could he do Yibum? So Rav will say, no. That's when we'll say that halacha l'maisa, if you come into the world of Yibum ineligible, the ineligibility remains. That's what we're talking about. Biblical ineligibility, right? Biblical ineligibility. So I can't meet the araisa. I'm not allowed to go ahead and do Yibum. But in this case, I will say these are not the araisas. These cases, interestingly enough, are dirabbanans. Aval halcha zeka dirabbanan here. Rabbi said this is actually fascinating. So what the Gemara is suggesting over here is that halacha l'maisa, the concept of zika, as we're espousing over here, this is a dirabbanan. This is not a da'araisa. And therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, and because it's only a d'rabanan, Rav will say the ineligibility is only there when the actual factors of ineligibility are in place. But for example, again, in this case, once one of the women in question dies, Rachel or Leah dies, the other one becomes eligible for Yibum, because halacha l'maisa, there is no longer a sister in the question. So we'll say, so let's just frame this here for just a moment. Everyone is agreeing with the principle that ultimately, again, your Yibum identity, your Yibum ability is concretized and solidified at the moment you become eligible for Yibum, which effectively means like this. If you are unable to perform Yibum at the time you fall into the Yibum pool, you are never permitted to do Yibum after that, even if circumstances change. The machlokes is how to apply that principle. Rav says that principle is only applied when? in cases of biblical ineligibility, right? So Reuven passes away, leaves behind the widow. Levi is already married to Rachel's sister. Because at that moment there is an Isser D'Oraisa, ultimately again, for Levi to do Yibum, even if Levi's wife dies afterwards, it's not going to make a difference. The ineligibility remains. But in the case of a Dirabanan, I will say, what's the case of a Dirabanan? That's our case. Reuben and Shimon are married to two sisters, Rachel and Leah. Ultimately, again, they both pass away. There's Levi, right? Levi can't do Yibum right now, but let's say again, Rachel passes away. Well, if Rachel passes away, Rav will say that halacha l'maisa, you could do Yibum with Leah, because ultimately the only thing that was preventing them was a zeka dirabanan. Once that zeka is gone, ultimately Yibum is possible. It seems that halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yochanan is not saying that way. Rabbi Yochanan seems told that halacha l'maisa, even with a rabbinic ineligibility, once the ineligibility is gone, ultimately again the prohibition still remains. We'll flesh this out just a little bit more. Says the Gemara, Eisvei Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Rabbi Yochanan. Let's read another line. So ultimately again, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina asked Rabbi Yochanan, Arba Achen, Beis Mehem Nesuan Beis Achayos, Umeisuan Nesuan Achayos. We'll say this is our case in the Mishnah. 4 brothers, 2 of whom are married to 2 sisters, and ultimately again, 2 brothers married to 2 sisters. The 2 brothers who are married to the 2 sisters pass away. Right? Ultimately, again, they have to do chalitza and they can't do yibum. Why is that? We'll say, why not? I don't understand why that's a problem. Why don't we go ahead? Ultimately, again, I will say, we're going to stop over here. We'll pick up in yahrzeit Hashem with this Eisvei tomorrow with this question. But I will say, understand, we're just leaving off in the middle of this machlokes. Everyone agrees in principle that when you become ineligible for Yibum, that ineligibility remains. The sheileimah is that only with biblical ineligibility or ultimately with rabbinic ineligibility as well. To be continued tomorrow, we'll say, Shkoyach.